And as I say that, I hit the record button. We will be recording this, and it will be posted on Together Colorado's Facebook page and the Facebook page for at First Presbyterian Church. That'll be up in a couple days after this, this session, and we will do that for all 5 sessions. Financial support and volunteering, as we all know, are critical to help with the homeless situation. Without these contributions to prevent homelessness and help those out of homelessness and help those while they're homeless, the programs and such that are happening would not be able to happen. And we thank everybody that does work for the homeless, contribution, prayers, volunteer work. Thank you for what you do for them already. But while we were, the social justice team at First Presbyterian Church was wondering if there's more that we could do. Is there more that we can do to prevent homelessness? Is there more that we could do to help get people out of homelessness? And so we will be addressing those questions this next 5 sessions. First, we're going to find out who the homeless are in Pueblo. Why are these people homeless? What is being done in Pueblo for the homeless? And finally, what can we as individuals, groups, and churches do to help? Tonight, we're going to just lay some foundational information. We were going to address the moral imperative that we have as a community and communities of faith regarding the homeless. We'll hear testimonies from those who are homeless and the history of homelessness in Pueblo. We're going to finish with small group discussions. We'll break you out into small groups of about 5 or 6. And we have a few questions for people to discuss in those small groups to kind of get us, again, a foundation for our whole discussion as we progress through. So the first person we'll have speak is Pastor Charles from First Presbyterian Church. He's going to discuss the moral imperative for us regarding this issue. And where are you, Pastor Charles?
Zoom minimized for me and I couldn't get it back up to unmute myself.
Okay.
As Nona said, I'm Charles. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the associate pastor for young adults and young families at First Presbyterian Church of Pueblo, but I'm also the organizing pastor of an experimental church community here in Pueblo called the Corinthian Bridge. And our thing is, well, was before COVID and we hope to be again soon. We are disciples of Jesus Christ, and we show that by going out into the community and helping wherever we can. As Nona said, I've been asked to come in and talk both as a pastor and as someone who's been out in the community some about the moral imperative for working for housing justice and other initiatives aimed at caring for those experiencing homelessness. A few disclaimers. First and foremost, I'm not a policy expert. I'm hoping to learn as much over the next few weeks as everyone else here, which means that if I refer to solutions during this address, they may be the wrong solutions. But the second thing is that my perspective is explicitly Christian. I know that this is an interfaith organization, an interfaith conference, but I can only speak from my own experience and my own perspective. So please forgive me if my approach is not as interfaith as it could be. I hope that you can find something of worth in this discussion regardless. There are 4 sources of my own ethical reflection when it comes to poverty and homelessness. The first is the creation stories found in Genesis, specifically chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. The second is the moral imperatives found in the Mosaic Law. The third are the proclamations of the prophets. And last but not least, of course, are the teachings of Jesus. The first and second chapters of Genesis tell us, among many other things, two important truths. The first is that humanity is made in the image of God. To be made in the image of God is to bear an inherent worth that is completely independent of any external factors we may wish to place on somebody's worth. Each human being bears a holy resemblance to the one who created heaven and earth and who has worked through history to save and redeem the whole of creation. Second, Genesis chapter 2 tells us that it is not good for people to be alone. Part of what it means to be made in the image of God is that we were made to be in community with one another. And when we reflect on God's proclamation that it is not good for people to be alone, we may begin to see that we bear responsibility to one another because we really need each other. Moving forward to the Mosaic law, throughout the law, we see not only a concern for, but not only a concern for ritual purity, but also a strong concern for the poor and the outcast. Most notably, there's a concern for widows and for the fatherless. We often would say orphans, but it specifically says the fatherless. They are among the most vulnerable populations in ancient Israel, and again, ancient Israel and Judah were told that they were to care for those who are the most vulnerable, the widow and the fatherless. They were also told that they were not to glean their harvests, their wheat and their grapes, which means you go through and you get as much as you can the first time, but you don't go through and pick your fields clean, because that was for those who couldn't provide for themselves. There are repeated commands again and again that the people of Israel, that includes their government as well as the individuals, are not to oppress and abuse the poor, the vulnerable, and immigrants. The prophets, such as Hosea and Isaiah, made similar commands. More pointedly, the prophets spent a not insignificant amount of time decrying Israel and Judah's abuse of the poor, sometimes naming this abuse as a reason for Israel and Judah's punishment. Micah, one of my favorite prophets, identified himself with the poor, referring to the poor as my people, decrying especially the exploitation of the poor by the rich and the powerful. Micah, of course, culminates in the famous verse, God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? My last and in many ways most important source of ethical reflection is, of course, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus in many ways took the earlier reflections on humanity and responsibility to the poor and distilled them. We have, of course, the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the good neighbor is the one who cares for the one in need. We are commanded to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Those who hoard their wealth are chided and called foolish, and the poor are blessed while the rich are often condemned. I would summarize all of this with Jesus's dual commandments to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and on all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. This must be not only the lens through which we read the whole of Scripture for Christians, but it must also be the lens through which Christian action must be filtered through. So you may be asking, well, how do we show love for God? To be sure, we show love for God by making time for God in worship and personal devotions. But love cannot be limited to adoration. It must be paired with acts of love. We all show love in different ways. You may be familiar, for instance, with the 5 love languages, but if love is not paired with action of some sort, we can't help but wonder how real that love really is. And again, the question is asked, how do we show through concrete action love for God? Jesus gives our answer by tying the first commandment to a second one. So Jesus ties love God to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, if you'll allow me a bit of an aside, there is a vindictive strain that runs through our society that I believe that people of faith must reject. It is this vindictiveness that lies at the heart of this two-pronged battle that I'll talk a little bit about later, that those working for justice across many planes face. We must work against the vindictive streak that resides in us, which tells us that a person must face the consequences of their actions in perpetuity. It tells us that each individual's responsibility to decide whether they sink or swim. I know that I still experience this sense of vindictiveness, this pull yourself up by your bootstraps and deal with the consequences of your own actions. This sense of callousness and almost jadedness. It's something that I know that I work through. And I think it's something that we all must work through. I combat it with a reminder that my role is to bring the love of Jesus to everyone I encounter. I am not the gatekeeper of that love. Those who live in our community experiencing homelessness are our neighbors in every sense of the word. Whatever other label you wish to put on them, they are first and foremost human beings. They are people. They have feelings, they have hopes, they have fears. They are fully human, created in the image of God, just as much as any of us are. I know it sounds demeaning to even have to say that, but it needs to be said because so often those experiencing homelessness are treated as less than human. Too often we apply our own labels, which we use to filter out who is and isn't deserving of our love and care. Jesus's parable of the Good Samaritan reminds me that those labels don't mean as much as we would like to think they do. Our job is not to pick and choose who is worthy of love, of decency, and of basic respect. I believe that all humanity is deserving of these things because I believe that we are all created in the image of God. I believe we show our love for God by showing love for neighbor, all of our neighbors. There are many ways which we can show love to our neighbors experiencing homelessness, many of which I'm sure we'll hear about over the next few weeks. We can take part in food distribution programs, give food or money to those we see at intersections, bring necessary items, sit with someone and have a conversation, or work to lift an individual or family out of homelessness. And of course, there are many, many more things that we could do. These are all good and wonderful things to do, which show love to individual people or even small groups of people. Those who are called to do this work do beautiful, powerful work that affirms the humanity of those they work with, extending dignity and care to people who may perhaps be denied it in other contexts. However, we do ourselves a disservice if we stop there. We do our siblings a disservice if we stop there. One-on-one and small scale work is beautiful work, but it's inherently limited. And frankly, it's not enough. We don't have enough resources, financial or human. We would do well to listen to the voices of those who are experiencing homelessness, for they know their needs better than the well-meaning people who may not understand the realities of living beyond our own spheres. In my own walk of faith, listening to the voices of the marginalized is almost as important as listening to the voice of God. People know their needs better than we ever could, and it is not our place to make value judgments on those needs. And so as we listen to the voice of the voiceless, we must take what we learn and work for broader changes. This is the important work that Together Colorado and similar organizations do. They listen to the community and they work to make changes that address those needs. While individual work is important, just as important is larger justice work. Justice work is working towards changing the system to provide support to prevent people from losing their homes in the first place, while making sure that those who wish to live without homes are taken care of. To quote Dr. Cornel West, justice is what love looks like in public. The issue of homelessness is the confluence of many other justice issues. Healthcare, both physical and mental, affordable housing, fair wages, criminal justice reform, rehabilitation, the war on drugs, and many more. Many of us are likely affected by one or more of these issues. And by working towards addressing these problems in a just and equitable way, we help not only ourselves, but those who are experiencing homelessness. The truth is, even if you're only motivated by your own self-interest, working for housing justice and the many issues surrounding it can only benefit us and our community. We all are inextricably connected, both as a matter of theological truth and a matter of fact, given the nature of our society. Again, I'm not a policy expert, but it seems to me that those who work towards justice are fighting a two-pronged battle. On the right, local governments who seek to criminalize and penalize homelessness through anti-homeless architecture, criminalizing feeding programs, preventing houses of worship from deliberately providing shelter, and so on. Those working for justice must confront the cruelty of a system that works to protect the interests of those in power, rather than caring for the least of these. The other prong is, of course, the apathy and vindictiveness of governments and communities who refuse to make the needed changes that would address the justice issues at the root of homelessness. Beloved, we cannot afford to look away from the problems that sit before us today. We simply cannot. If you'll forgive me for projecting my own theology onto the audience, we cannot sit by while people made in the holy image of God reside in our communities at risk and remain uncared for. We must be driven by love for our neighbor, because in loving our neighbor, we show our love for ourselves and our love for God. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Pastor Charles. That gives us a lot to start with and a framework for all the other speakers that we will be listening to. The next person we'll have speak is Kathy Cline from the Pueblo Rescue Mission. She's the executive director there. That is the mission that supports those adults that are homeless. And Kathy, you want to take it away?
Sure. You know me, most people I know on this call, they all know I have no problem talking. I'm wearing a mask. I hope you can hear me because we're in a very tiny room and there's 4 of us. And so that's why we're wearing masks while we do this talk. I am actually starting on a very positive note about homelessness, because the individuals that I've asked to come today to share their story have all moved forward in their lives in various ways, for various resources that they've been able to access. And so I'm really pleased to start on a high note, that there are lots of great options if we work together to help folks that do want to get out of a homeless living situation. So with that being said, the first person that I'm going to have, and like I said, we're going to kind of switch every time somebody talks because it's a little room. The first person is my friend James. And I'm going to let him talk about, I've given them some ideas of what to talk about, to tell their story to you folks, to know what got them in homelessness to begin with and what got them out. So with that, here's James. Okay.
Let's see here. How y'all doing? Okay, Kathy wants to talk to me about a story about how I ended up in the shelter. Well, when I lost my last job, I ended up coming down this way. I was actually on the way to Albuquerque to help my sister out, and well, things didn't develop like it was supposed to. They had their own issues. So I ended up in Pueblo, and I was stuck. At the time, there was no shelters, there was no warming shelter, so I was camping out. Actually got a ticket for camping. And rather than moving my camp when it was the middle of winter and freezing cold, I ended up at the warming shelter, which ended up leading to this place, which opened up shortly after that. Because of this place, it allowed me to get cleaned up and start looking for an actual job again. Before the whole summer long, I couldn't get a job. There was no way to get clean. There was nothing going on. Just trying to go down and get an interview is impossible. But getting through here and then getting through some of the other organizations like Rehire, it gave me the opportunity to get back to work. And getting off the street, that for anybody, or any of us, it's a matter of choice. You have to make the conscious choice of actually doing it before you can do it. It's no different than getting off drugs or alcohol or anything. Nobody's going to get off the street unless they want to. The Rehire hired me on, and I was working at one place, and then the coronavirus hit, which kind of blew that. Kathy agreed to put me to work here, and that actually worked out rather well. Because now I'm working here all the time. And I mean, it really changed my life enough that I actually don't have a plan to leave now. I don't know what else would you want. Yeah, I'm a veteran. I worked in VOA, and I've several other groups. Sorry, can't read this. Yeah.
So James was, like I said, you know, he told you he came into the warming shelter and then to the permanent shelter. And, you know, he was probably, in all honesty, in the beginning, maybe not someone who would have picked out and said, oh, well, he's going to succeed. He's going to be fine. Because in the beginning, he was still struggling with a lot of things just to get back.
Kathy, I'm going to.
Yes.
I just need you to be closer to the mic so we can hear you consistently. Thank you.
I knew this would be an issue. I just want to say about James, you know, when he came here and he was staying here, and the fact that he's a veteran, you know, there were a lot of opportunities that maybe would have opened up to him that don't always open up to everybody. But there's a lot of folks here who are veterans who haven't accessed any of this. And so James is an exception. And he has truly made his life different. And going through the Rehire program, which is a program that you will hear about at some point in one of these weeks, that has been a tremendous situation for him. It put him to work at minimum wage. During COVID, he got to work here at the rescue mission. So technically, he worked here and he lived here and he got paid. But the bottom line is that didn't last long for James because he got himself a place to live. He moved out. He saves money. He's an amazing young man. And once he was finished with the rehire program, I hired him as a permanent employee here at the Rescue Mission. And he's one of my star folks. Quite frankly, the majority of the people who do work here at the Rescue Mission, out of our 18 employees, 75% of the employees have the lived experience of homelessness at some point in their lives. And that makes all the difference in how they work with the folks we have staying with us. So I just had asked James to come because I think he portrays such a great success that we would hope for everybody. He wanted it. And like he said, that was all the difference in the world. So I applaud him for his just strength. He had so many strengths, and he knows that he has a support system. And I think that helps him too. So I'll let him finish up. I don't want to do all the talking.
No, like Kathy said, my situation was probably a little bit different than most because I've been in and out of the streets for years and years and years.
James, could you please get closer to the?
I'm used to having a headset on, sorry.
Okay.
As far as the homelessness, my situation has always been a little bit different because I've been in and out, off the street, on the street, and I generally work with the homeless at some point. It's just something that I do. Kathy's always supported me ever since we first moved in here, even before this place opened up. She had actually seen me on the street and help out. She tried to help me out then. She actually showed that she cared, and it made me want to care again. And I probably would be on the street, probably somewhere in another town, probably on the street right now, if not for Kathy. Oh, I'm serious. That's the honest truth. But the success we've had here at the shelter has helped me keep going. If it wasn't for seeing all the success and actually wanting to come in and going to work, which is kind of weird for me, but I'd probably be on the street. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't have the desire to make myself better. I can't speak for anybody else, but I mean, if you don't have the desire to make yourself better, you're never going to be better. And all the programs that are out there, they work if you're willing to let them work. And one of the biggest problems that a lot of people have is they're not willing to let them work. They're not willing to change. And it's not a lot of difference between the alcoholism or the drug abuse or any other problems that a person has. Before you can get better, you have to be willing to do it. And that's usually a hard part. And here at the shelter, we try to help people want to help themselves. And it's not always easy, but we do try. Next.
Okay, so we're going to do a really quick shift here because of the office. I'd like to thank James for sharing his story with us. I hope that, I hope that helped all of you to understand someone who's been here and done it and moved on. He's just amazing. So the next, I have two people, and this is kind of a special circumstance. I have Melissa and I have Wayne. Now, Wayne is hard of hearing, he's deaf. And so Melissa has to do signing with him or speak to him, but he can definitely tell you his story. And the reason that these two people, these are my friends. I've worked with them off and on for a long time, and their success makes me cry. I'm so proud of them. And so I just want them to be able to share their story with you guys So I want everyone to understand the positives. People can get themselves out of homelessness. And so rather than talking about only the negatives, I want you to see the positives on the front end, and then we can talk about all the other stuff that needs to be done. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Melissa and Wayne. So you guys got to scooch in really close. So this is Melissa and Wayne. And first of all, Melissa's going to kind of talk to you. They're a couple. They've been on the streets together as a couple. They've been in the shelter as a couple, and now they're living independently as a couple. And so I'm going to let Melissa kind of explain their history and their story to you, just so you kind of understand.
Well,
Melissa, I need you to get more centered in the screen and talk right up to the talk right up to the microphone.
well, see, the story that I'm got on the street is my ex-boyfriend had beat me mentally, and my landlord threw me out because of police contact. And then I met Wayne a year after I was homeless, and we've been through a lot too. You know, I'll admit he had a drinking problem. He was a little violent. Since we got to the shelter, Kathy helped him to quit drinking and helped us out a lot. Really, if it wasn't for her or the staff, we probably wouldn't be where we're at now, because when I came back a few months ago, one of her staffs was telling me that I could help him get his first stimulus check, and I did that. And with that, we got us a place and then stabilized. So it's actually nice that there's Kathy and people you could depend on.
Tell them your story.
Anyway, Matthew, I'm Matthew, and I'm deaf. I'm using my Android phone to translate everything that's being said. I guess first time I was homeless is when I was about 18, 19 years old. And like she mentioned, I had a major drinking problem. And I'll be honest with you, I'll go maybe 2-3 days without drinking, and I might have 1 or 2. So I'm not over that problem yet. But I think the reason why I was mainly homeless, I didn't feel self-worth. I didn't feel like I was worth nothing. And meeting people like that, meeting people like her, made me want to change. So I think that's the main reason why I cut back on my drinking. And the COVID-19 virus, I caught that, and that kind of helped me behind too. But it's the self-worth is what made me want to change, and people that care about me. And I got a hard time trusting people, and it took me a while to trust her. And I agree with what James said earlier. There's programs out there. You just have to want to go through them, and you have to want to change. I think that was the biggest thing for me, is wanting to change and thinking all that time I wasted drinking, feeling sorry for myself, and just not caring what happens to me. I think that's what got me clicking in my head. So, and it was help from people like Kathy, bringing us here, making us realize I'm better than that. She's better than that. We're all better than that. There's no excuse for being on the streets. A lot of people, I believe, a lot of people that are homeless in the streets is because they don't care about themselves. They feel worthless. That's just my opinion. You know what I mean?
What you guys do during the week to come here?
Well, since we have that, do come here and try to monitor.
Melissa, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. You need to get closer to the center of the screen.
Well, since we did get off the street, we do come here and help Kathy by volunteering ourselves. Like we started teaching sign language here for anybody that wants to learn. I still come and help her with the laundry, and he comes and helps when they need the place to be clean and stuff like that. So that gives us something to do still, to keep us from doing something bad that we don't want to do anymore. So.
Yeah, I agree with you on that volunteering part. Well, technically speaking, right now, I'm doing community service
I'm sorry,
With
could
my
you get
dad,
closer to the
I think-
screen?
from the decisions I made before. But I told Kathy, even after I'm done with my community service, I would still like to come in here and help. Makes me feel good about myself, and we owe a lot to Kathy for everything she's done for us. We owe a lot, don't we?
Get it yourself.
And I just makes me feel good about myself. I don't know about you, but personally, I like coming here because there's
Could you explain to us some of the stuff that,
happens.
could you explain some of the stuff that's been done that has helped you? When you said all the stuff that Kathy's done and all the stuff that's been done at the shelter, can you explain what some of that is that has helped?
She's done a lot. And I think the very first time coming in the shelter, I didn't like it one bit. Second time, you can see Kathy's doing a lot of things around here. She's got, I'm surprised the ladies have hair. I mean, I would have pulled my hair out a long time ago.
Tell her how mean I am. Tell him how mean I am, Melissa. Yeah, I did, huh?
Um,
Well, when we first came here, we,
I'm sorry, we can't hear you unless you're in the center of your speaker.
okay, when we were first, because I was at the old shelter that when she first took over at the Salvation Army, and I wasn't with Matt then. But when they closed it down and she was trying so hard to get the warming shelter open, that's when I met Matt. And when he was in jail when I went over there the first time, and then when he got out, he went over there, and like he said, he didn't really want to be here and stuff. And then I met Kathy and some of the when she had what are they called? The officer, Tony.
Oh, the security people.
Yeah, when she had the security people, they were really strict on that about his drinking, especially a couple of them that knew him. Well, I know one day when we moved over here, he was fighting with me across the street. Kathy heard it, and what really got him to change then is she did yell at him and tell him that if he didn't change, that she had wanted him. So the next day, or actually that same night, it was either the next day or the same night, he asked her if he could stay in and to detox, and she let him. So that's what happened on that.
Okay,
week that I stayed here for detoxing. Why did I do that? You know what the question is?
So Nona, I know this is hard to do with us all in this room and not being able to really probably hear as well. And Matthew has, the issue of the hearing. I don't want anybody to think that I put these folks up to saying that I did something. I just wanted you to know, I wanted everyone to hear, this is only 2 stories out of so very many that have occurred this past year of folks that have helped themselves, had a hand up with different resources and different people from the community, but they've made a change in their lives for the better. And that's what we're aiming for every day here. So that's what I wanted to come across. It's hard for folks to actually, I think, give a testimony to what their story is. Some are better at it than others, but these guys have done a great job. And I just want people to understand, with these kind of services, no matter whether it's here, Posada, the, other agencies, if they have a chance to help themselves, they can. And so we have to give them that opportunity. That's what this is all about. So with that, if there's a question for anybody, we'll take it. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and stop at this point in time.
Kathy, what we're going to do is we're going to wait for questions for the small group discussion. If you want to stay for the small group discussion at the end of the talk, or just come back for it, you can. Otherwise, we will get questions to you for the next time that you speak, because you will be speaking several times, as you know. So thank you so much for all three of you guys for your testimony. I know it's really hard, and I commend you for all the work you've done to move yourself out of homelessness into permanent housing. And I'm glad you're able to use the services that were available to you to help get that done. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Okay.
Thank you too.
Yes, thank you. Next, we're going to go and just address some of the history of homelessness in Pueblo. And we're going to have two people speak about that, and then we will break up into small groups and just, okay. Sorry, my internet connection is unstable. I apologize. And then we'll break up into small groups and just discuss some moral imperative and some other things. We have questions for you regarding that. So the next person to speak is Margery Herrington. She's from First Presbyterian Church, and she's going to speak about kind of the history of some housing issues here in Pueblo. Go ahead, Margery.
So I'll be giving an overview of the economic and housing history of Pueblo, kind of to provide some background about some of the inequities and challenges that are seen in our city today. This slide shows one of the oldest houses in Pueblo, which is believed to have been built in 1850. It's adobe. In the 1850s through the 1870s, people came to the Pueblo area primarily as cattlemen, farmers, and merchants. Agricultural products from the Pueblo area furnished food for the mining settlements established after gold was discovered in Colorado in 1858. John Thatcher was one of the important figures in the development of Pueblo. He came here in 1862 and started a store in a log cabin on 2nd Street. After he married Margaret Henry in 1866, the couple lived in this 5-room house on Santa Fe Avenue.
Margery, excuse me, I apologize. Your screen sharing is not working.
It's not.
Did you hit screen share?
Yes, I did. I hit share screen. Oh, here we go. Here's the problem.
There we go.
Now we've got it?
Yes.
Okay. So backing up, that's the 1850 house. So you can see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's Pueblo in 1867. Here's the first home for Margaret Thatcher. And then his activities as a merchant, banker, cattleman, and railroader provided the money needed to start construction of Rosemont in 1891. The Thatchers employed Irish servants at Rosemont, as they had at their earlier house in Santa Fe. Other people in Pueblo made their fortunes in the iron and steel industry. CF&I, Colorado Fuel and Iron, which started steel production in 1881, was the largest employer in Colorado for nearly a century, with a maximum workforce of about 11,000 people. In addition to the steel and iron works, Pueblo had a number of smelters for extracting lead, silver, gold, and copper from ore that was shipped in from mines all over the West. Many people who worked in the smelters and steel mill lived as squatters in settlements on open or public land because they couldn't afford other housing. The pictures on the left show Smelter Hill, located to the east of Santa Fe Avenue. The picture at the bottom left was taken a few years after the upper one. The picture on the right shows an Italian family living on Smelter Hill in 1903. As you can see, the prosperity that industry and commerce brought to the owners and managers of the companies was not shared equitably with the people working in the actual production of the goods and services. Italians were the first large group of immigrants to come to work in Pueblo. This slide shows some of the other immigrant groups and demonstrates some other housing patterns. The three young men are cousins who came to Pueblo from Greece in about 1907, rented an apartment on Abriendo Avenue, and worked for CF&I. The 1902 picture in the upper right is of the Maqueda family, who were of Slovenian origin and lived near Santa Fe in Northern in a neighborhood called by their derogatory term Bojon Town. Single men frequently lived at boarding houses near the steel mills. The Swedish widow who ran the Davenport boarding house from 1919 to 1927 is shown in the picture at the bottom left with her daughters and some of her boarders. Previously, the Davenport had been a Japanese boarding house. The picture in the lower right shows Arthur's Castle, a brothel that was built at first in Santa Fe in 1887. Some immigrants, as well as women born in America, became prostitutes because of the demand for their services and the limited possibilities for work for unmarried women. By the 1890s, the red light district in Pueblo had been restricted to First Avenue between Santa Fe and Summit Avenues. When the district was closed in 1911, after several years of people working toward this, the women just moved into hotels and later into road houses out of the city. The dust bowl of the Depression era extended to our area, as shown by the dust cloud photographed east of Pueblo. The second picture from 1930 shows women who were modeling 3 styles of dust masks being sold by one of the stores on Main Street. The fourth picture from about 1932 shows a man with a roadside market set up by the vehicle body that's serving as his house. At the height of the Ku Klux Klan's popularity in Pueblo in the 1920s, 17% of the city's population were immigrants and another 17% were children of immigrants. The Klan's efforts mainly focused on Catholics, but other minority populations were also targeted, increasing the difficulties that they faced. In the early history of Pueblo, a number of groups worked to provide for individuals who needed special housing. The picture in the upper left of the slide shows the superintendent's residence at Colorado State Hospital. In 1896, the hospital had 11 attendants to care for 422 patients, which is not anywhere like the ideal ratio that one would want to have. The Pueblo County Poor Farm on 20th Lane, shown here about 1930, provided a home for indigent residents of the county. The residents who were able to do so worked on the farm, which produced a wide variety of crops. The City Federation of Colored Women's Clubs was the group behind the organization of the institution that became the Lincoln House, which was an orphanage for Black children. In 1905, a group of citizens who were concerned about the number of parentless children in Pueblo formed the Protestant Orphanage Committee. They established the McClellan Home for Children, which changed locations several times. Eventually, it evolved into McClellan School, which is still in operation. This large map of Pueblo was prepared in 1934 by 6 local men who were involved with real estate. The A areas marked in green were categorized as best, as you can see on the legend. These included North Elizabeth and the Aberdeen addition near where Pueblo Community College is now located. B areas were described as still desirable, which made them clearly a better choice than the Yellow C neighborhoods, which were characterized as definitely declining. D areas were colored red and described as hazardous. This system of color coding areas was used by many government agencies and private companies in making decisions about allocating resources away from neighborhoods seen to be undesirable. The descriptions of specific areas on the map give an indication about the attitudes and inequalities at the time. The description of D2, which is this one here to the west of the state hospital, said, "This area resembles D1, except it has more houses, all shacks, wherein are found a variety of the foreign elements of the poorest class. This has long been a blighted section wherein sales are virtually impossible and no loans are made." The description of D9 down here near the Arkansas River said, "In Italian concentration, the southern part of it is occupied by a conglomeration of foreign industrial workers. The houses are cheap, old, and run down. Sales are almost impossible in this section, and loans will not be made therein." The policies mentioned in these descriptions are an example of what has come to be known as redlining. This practice includes refusing a loan or insurance to someone because they live in an area deemed to be at poor financial risk. When housing loans are denied because of location, race, or national origin, people are systematically denied the chance to build up equity with the money they pay for housing. Instead, the long-range investment benefits from the rent they pay go to the property owners. Section D10 on the map is south of the state fairgrounds and Mountain View Cemetery. The description for D10 said, "This area is only sparsely settled with small old shacks. It has no possibilities whatsoever." The pictures at the bottom show two of the houses in that area today. Clearly, the realtors were wrong in their negative assessment. In this forum, we will be looking at ways to overcome the difficulties in providing adequate housing for Pueblo's residents, so that what may appear to be impossible can become a reality. So I hope this is a useful background for some of the things we'll be discussing later in our forum.
Margery, thank you so much. I didn't know before her talk what redlining was, and it's very, obviously very negatively influenced people's ability to get housing. And next, we will have Kathy back to speak to us about what the homeless situation was like prior to today. Going back, I think about in the 80s or so, I think you said you were going to be speaking, Kathy. Anyway, let you take it away.
Okay. Hopefully you can hear me this time. So, looking back at homeless services in the Pueblo community, overall, for the many years, faith-based communities have always been at the forefront of taking care of those that are in need. We maybe didn't qualify and call them homeless in the past, but over time, many of the churches that are represented here this evening have been involved in helping. One of the primary entities that is a church, but also a social service agency, is the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army has been in Pueblo for the past 100+ years, more like 130. And they've always been somewhat at the forefront of helping with those from the streets. That actually changed, and I'll get to that a little bit later in time. So you asked me to start in the 80s, so that's where I began. In 1984, Tom and Marion Bond came to Pueblo from Montana. After meeting with a number of faith groups here in Pueblo, it was determined that there was a need for some type of a shelter program. Now, Reverend Bond was at the time, and this was a gospel rescue mission, which many of you probably know is a bit of a different format than what we are running today. The Gospel Rescue Mission was in this same location at 728 West 4th, but it was just a portion of this building. And when the Bonds formed this, they could house 30 men. And they required, under the directions of Gospel Rescue Mission, you had to come and you had to sit through at least a 30-minute faith presentation and before you could sleep. And so at that time, a lot of people that were here many years ago, you know, that was just the accepted way. They knew they had to come in and sit down and listen, and then they could go to the shelter. In extreme weather at that time, there were churches that took over for the sheltering, which I find very interesting because that is a big stumbling block we have these days about extreme weather conditions and where can the excess people be housed. One of the things that was required under the old Gospel Rescue Mission format was after 5 days, an individual had to start paying $2 a night to stay here. At that time, it was just shelter. There was no food. And then the one thing I found really interesting about Reverend Bond was, even back then, his whole strategy was to have people get, you know, on their way and become independent. He had a number of programs here, not that much unlike what we're trying to do today. So even though it was a Gospel Rescue Mission with a different format, it was somewhat of the transitional format that we practice today. After several years, they were able to open a kitchen here. And if any of you had ever been here, it was quite the kitchen. And they served 3 meals a day. Also, they worked with the faith community in here, and they ran shepherding houses. And those houses were private citizens here in the community that housed women and children in their homes. And so they were able to lodge in those homes for several months at a time. And then after several years, the Wayside Cross Mission was able to purchase the other half of this building, and they opened the Good Shepherd Inn, which was for women. Initially, there were children that stayed here, but that was very short-lived. So by that time, it was in the 90s, early 90s, there was both a men and women shelter here in Pueblo. In 1987, Posada, who many of you know, they incorporated to work on homeless issues. And it was in 1987 that both Ann Stottleman and Scott Hauser put together a warming shelter over on 112 D Street. And so that shelter was just for men, and it was just a warming shelter, and it didn't house more than, I think, about 40 guys at a time. But I think if you hear the numbers that I'm talking about, 30 when the rescue mission opened, 40 for the warming shelter, you're starting to see the pattern that the issue of who we classify as homeless today was already starting back then. We may not have called them all homeless, but that those numbers were starting to grow. Posada also at that time developed some support services. They opened a day program over at 1008 North Grand, right across from the Sacred Heart Cathedral. And at that time, they offered case management services, different things. It was a small place. They didn't have showers. They didn't have availability for a lot of things, but they were able to be, at that time, they were the only place that folks had to go to during the day to access some resources. And probably in the 90s, Posada purchased a motel over on the south side of Pueblo on Ywca, and it is called the Ywca Family Shelter. And it houses, it was a renovated, they renovated an old motel, 10 units. They're able to house families with children there. And it's a very strong case management program. It is still operational today. It is the only family shelter still operating in Pueblo, Colorado today in 2021. The YWCA also runs a shelter program. The YWCA has been around for hundreds of years, but their focus has been in recent years, in the past actually 40 plus years in Pueblo, has been domestic violence. So the folks that are housed at the YWCA are victims of domestic violence. It is primarily focused on women and children. And within the past 6 months, the YWCA has changed where the residents are housed. They are housed in a safe house, an undisclosed location, because the facility down on Santa Fe proved not always to be safe and secure for the victims of domestic violence. The Interfaith Network, which has a place really near and dear to my heart, and many of you who I know on the screen today were instrumental in getting that program going. The Interfaith Hospitality Network was the brainchild of a woman out of New York who used to serve sandwiches to the homeless at the subway. And she grew this program into a national model. And the faith community here in Pueblo started working on this for actually, I think the late 90s. It finally came to fruition in 2002 when we were able to become operational. I had the privilege of being the first director of that program. And that program was primarily done in all of your churches. It was a nomadic shelter program, to say the least. What we did was, it was on a 7-day rotation, and the beds were moved every 7 days to a church, usually a basement. And each family that stayed at the shelter had their own separate entity with the beds for them. And then in the morning, they were picked up at 7 a.m., transported back to a day program. And the day program, they could shower there, they could keep their belongings, they could do everything, have some food, and the children went to school. All of that was done with just volunteers and me. And it expanded to a few staff members as time went on. Sadly, as time went on, it became very difficult for the faith community to be able to support that program. It was only 4 families, but as we used to joke, it was all run by volunteers, and we used to talk about how it was not the Cleaver family from Leave It to Beaver. It was more like the Osborne family of who you were dealing with and how you were dealing with them. So it was a lot of stress, as we would say. Sadly, we had to close that program after about 10 years of operation, and we just couldn't find enough churches to stay on, and so that's why we had to close the program. And today I can tell you it could be used. My number is still on the website, and I still receive calls for the Interfaith Network from families with children in Pueblo who need a place to go. So homeless services from 2000 to the present. This is the part that I'm the most familiar with nowadays. The Salvation Army provided a warming shelter, men only. I actually ran that program for a number of years. Posada is still the only family shelter in Pueblo. And Posada has a resource center for adult homeless, for families, and they do a lot of great work. But sadly, that program was shut down. They have a new office now, but of course, COVID has stopped a lot of that interaction. In 2017, the world for homeless in Pueblo changed. Starting in May of 2017, the division commander of the Salvation Army directed that there would be no more homeless services by the Salvation Army in Pueblo, Colorado. That meant there was no warming shelter and there was no more soup kitchen. In June of 2017, just a month later, the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission, who had taken over the Pueblo Rescue Mission by this point in time, shut down the Pueblo Rescue Mission and gutted the entire building and stopped operations entirely. On July 1st of 2017, Posada closed its day program. So as you can see, within that 90-day period in 2017, homeless services in Pueblo pretty much stopped happening. And so as a result, a lot of people started talking and, you know, very much expressing the need of the things that need to happen. So Colorado Springs Rescue Mission spent 2 years in Pueblo trying to convince the city of Pueblo that they needed to provide them with a location and pay for a campus of care for the homeless. Now, any of you who've worked in this area know that doesn't bode well with the city of Pueblo government. So in November of 2018, the Colorado Springs Rescue Mission determined that it was in their best interest to hand the Pueblo Rescue Mission back over to a couple of board members who are still here. And so that's where the journey began for what we have today. During that time, in December of 2018 through April of 2019, the Rescue Mission ran a warming shelter for the city of Pueblo in an old warehouse building. There was no running water. We used outhouses, and it was quite the place, but it worked. Nobody died. Then in October of 2019, the city again asked the Rescue Mission to run a warming shelter for them because there was no place else for them to go. The Rescue Mission stepped up and we did that. During this time, the Rescue Mission in the spring and summer of 2019 received $1.3 million through the Department of Local Affairs to renovate this building here on 4th Street. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it sounds really great that that happened, and it was, but it was not nearly enough money for all the things that we had to take care of here. And so lots of things were changed and lots of different things happened that we had to adjust to. But the good news is that we were able to open this up now in January of 2020. The only reason we were able to do that is because the zoning for this building was grandfathered in the 80s. If it had not been grandfathered in with the zoning, there would be no shelter in Pueblo today. Zoning is the biggest obstacle to homeless issues in Pueblo. Also, just to let you know that we're operational, we're 24/7, we serve 2 meals a day. In the first year, we had almost 30,000 bed nights and served well over 30,000 meals here at the Rescue Mission. Our services are open to not only the people who stay here, but to the people from the streets, and that includes showers. So COVID has been a little difficult for some of us along the way, but I will tell you that we managed an outbreak that happened at the end of November when so many people in Pueblo got sick. We managed it, we took care of it, we test every week, and we have no positive cases since then. We also are partners with Posada on a COVID shelter for the homeless, which I don't know if Posada is thrilled. I think they're probably thrilled too. We've only had about 3 people in the last two months. So, but we provide services for those folks that are there also. So we've managed the COVID. We've managed to keep the Rescue Mission going strong. We're full most of the time. This past week with the extreme temperatures, the mayor was able to open up the transit center and the Pueblo Police Department lobby for those to come in out of the cold and not freeze to death. And that was a very great move on their part. I know that's hard for them, but they did it, and I'm very pleased for them. So that's what's going on in Pueblo. That's the history. The one thing that I will say is Pueblo is, obviously it's my home, so I have a bias, but I believe that we work together so well. And yes, over time, there's always been some glitches, but overall, between the agencies and the faith community, we work together really well on this subject, addressing this issue. And I think going forward, it's only going to get better that we understand what our needs are, what the needs of the homeless in our community are, and that we just learn to accept, as Reverend Charles said, and treat them with dignity and respect, because they are our fellow human beings. And so I thank you all for participating in this and caring enough to spend your Sunday evening learning about what's going on out there and how we can all work together and make this a better community. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate your efforts, all your efforts down at the Pueblo Rescue Mission. I know we all do. Anybody who's had a chance to see what she's been doing knows that she's doing the work of about 2, 3, maybe 4 people. So thank you for all that you've been doing. What we're going to do now is to go into breakout groups. We're going to assign it randomly, so there won't be a leader in any group. You guys will kind of have to pick your own leader to run things, if you will. And we also would like to have somebody in that group take notes. If you go down into your chat, we have, let's see, it says small group discussions, and you click on that and that'll open up the spreadsheet, and somebody in the chat room can go ahead and start typing in one of the columns to take notes for your group. And then if you scroll down just a little bit further, it says questions for the small breakout groups. And so what questions we have are, what are the moral imperatives regarding housing and homelessness to you? And what would Pueblo look and feel like if everybody was housed? I think that's, so that's the grand scheme of how we should want our community to look like. So what would it look like? Also, I just wrote down a few notes from Charles' talk. Justice is what love looks like, and we are all connected. Those are just a couple things I wrote down, and there might be other things you guys can pull into your small group discussions. So I'm going to send you guys all out into breakout rooms now, and I'll pull you back in a few minutes. Let's see, 6.
We unmute.
Okay. Okay, mute, unmute. Uh-oh. How do we unmute everybody? Oh my gosh. Can people unmute? Okay. Can you guys unmute yourself? Chuck, go ahead and say something. I think you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm online, I guess.
Yes, yes. So I'm not.
Yeah, this is Dave. I've unmuted myself.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. I'll go ahead and take notes for this little group. I don't know how this is going to work. We're experimenting with some of this stuff. But what are some of your thoughts regarding, regarding what you've heard, moral imperative, how Pueblo should look?
Well, if everyone had a home and if everybody had a home or a place to go in Pueblo, I believe that you would see less panhandling, that those kind of activities that are going on, even with even with whatever shelter programs they have. There's still a immense amount of panhandling and a danger for the people who are on the street, those who aren't in shelters. And for instance, the other day, oh, by the way, I'm from King of Kings Lutheran Church, so I work with Barbara and her group. But we have packages that we've made up that have hats and gloves and a few snacks and a bottle of water. And there was a young couple that very cold weather, they were walking up Dillon Drive, and I stopped and gave them one of these packages. I wish I had more to give them, but we know because of the weather, they were actually freezing and cold. And I told them we had put little cards inside the packages, and we said, there are numbers there. You can call Posada or you could call the city mission.
Mm-hmm.
So just to give them at least a path to, maybe some greater help. But yeah, so there's a group of people that probably don't want housing right away, who need to want it. So those I think are most at risk in the daytime. Maybe they go to their shelter in the evening, but I see if people had housing and places to go, we would have more safety and less danger for those people.
I think you and I end up being the only ones in this group, Chuck.
Oh boy. A group of two. Well, it's a group.
Yeah, that's right. When two or more gathered, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So what? So you said King of Kings. Is that where you're from?
Yes. King of Kings.
Go ahead.
We're over on Vinewood.
Okay. And over on the south side, then, is that right?
Yeah, Barbara Rippinger and her group of people.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, okay, good deal. Yeah. So how many of these packages and stuff are you guys giving out?
We made up 50, and we put them in the church hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And we've sent out an email, and we talked about it at our congregational meeting today, that take a couple, put them in your car, and if you see somebody or somebody is asking you for help, you can give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with 50, and I was at church today for the meeting, and there's probably 15 or 20 that are left. So I'm not sure if they've all been handed out, but people have them to hand out.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. Yeah. All those little things do add up.
Yes.
Makes a little bit of difference. Somebody gets some water here and a candy bar there.
Yeah.
Helps them keep going.
Yeah, we put in a granola bar and those tuna meals where you could put the tuna on a cracker and stuff like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. It seems gosh, if Pueblo, everybody was housed in Pueblo, I don't know, it seems like it would be just a happier place. That's just what I see.
Yeah,
because when I drive down and see people on the side walking with their stuff all bundled up, it makes me sad. It hurts it hurts to see that, and that they look to me miserable, and it seems like it would just be I don't know, be a little bit of utopia if everybody had housing.
A lot of those people look like they've been discarded,
Discarded. That's a really good good description. That's kind of how that I forgot his name, but the gentleman who spoke second on that
James.
No, James was the first one. So it's the one who spoke second. I can't remember what his name was.
Wayne,
thank you. That's kind of what he mentioned, that he felt like he was just useless and wasn't important and was discarded. That's a very powerful word. Yeah, that's very good. So, okay. What about the moral imperative that we have for this?
Well, I think anything we do for them is, if, as Charles said, it should be an act of love. And, you know, when you do something like that, I wish I had more time to talk to that couple the other day, but they were so cold and so,
Yeah.
you know, I wish I could have done more. You know, it brings a tear to your eye.
Right.
You know, my wife and I were driving and we saw them and we had the package in our car. And we decided we need to help these people. We don't know who they are. I didn't get their names. I parked the car and walked up to them and said, you know, our church wants you to have this, to try to make it, you know, a more human, not just to throw something to them. Say, our church, you know, and I said, our church wants you to have this, and there are some numbers in there you can call if you need help. So I guess that's a start towards that moral imperative, you know.
Right.
To treat somebody.
Yeah, to actually reach out instead of drive by.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So we have just a couple more minutes. Let's see, I'm going to put that down. Act of love, reaching out instead of driving by. Okay. And yeah, we've got 2 more minutes before we come back to the group. So are there many people, do you guys have your own social justice team there, or?
Yes, it's a social justice ministry, yes.
Ministry. Oh, very good, very good.
Yeah, we're working on the homeless now, and we're working on the immigration issue. So,
and that's actually what we're doing, of course, at First Press too. And we want to combine different, we want to get together with the different churches doing this. Maybe we have a bigger voice and more power if there's more of us together. So yeah, that would be, would you mind putting your contact information in the chat? I think it's only going to go to me right now. But if you could, maybe we could get that, make that connection between our group and yours.
All right, let's see.
Do you hit the little chat button?
I did.
Okay, and so it should just, I think it's only set up to go to me still. And so it'd be a direct message to Nona.
Yeah, the problem is I have the host is inviting you to join breakout room 3, and that's overlaying the chat.
Okay, so when we come back, maybe it'll be available. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'll do that for you.
Okay, it's time to go back. So I will see you later.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora.
Chuck. All righty. They've been given 60 seconds. Let's see. Let's make chat available. Okay. I don't know how to make chat available. I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff with this, let me tell you. Okay. Okay, they'll be back in 16 seconds now. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that worked out. This running the Zoom is new to me, so I hope you guys were able to chat with each other. We will have somebody who is very good at doing these chat and breakout rooms in charge of this technology next week and the following week. So whatever glitches we had this week, he will be able to make sure that doesn't happen next week. Okay. So thank you so much for participating. Let's see. The next 2 Sundays, we will actually be hearing from 10 different people who are involved directly with the homeless and they will speak about the group of homeless that they see and that they work with daily. As we were putting this entire program together, there were more and more groups that we hadn't thought about that became that we became aware of as we were talking to different people, and they referred us to somebody else. So next two Sundays are going to be very informative about all the different groups of homeless people in our city, in our county. So they will be discussing what the current local reality is of being homeless here in Pueblo, and we look forward to you guys joining us. And we'll call that a wrap for tonight. So you guys, thank you for coming, and look forward to seeing you next Sunday. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.